Following the repeal of the Stamp Act, the monarchy faced rising pressure back at home. English landlords who were very politically powerful abroad worried that the lack of taxation on colonists would result in an increase on taxes on the elite. This group of landlords began pressuring the monarchy to start taxing the colonists again, and eventually King George III relents. He tasked Charles Townshend, who's in charge of Parliament, with reinitiating these taxes. In 1765, an act called the Mutiny Act, or Quartering Act, was passed that required the colonies to provide shelter and supplies to troops who were guarding the frontier. Colonists didn't necessarily mind providing for these troops. They'd been doing so since the 7 Years' War, but they disliked the mandatory nature of the act. The Massachusetts Assembly refused to support the act. New York also refuses. However, New York posed a major problem for the Crown because the headquarters for the Army was in New York City. Townshend decides he's got to react, so he disbands the New York Assembly until they obey the Mutiny Act. The next step is to enact the Townshend Acts, otherwise known as the Revenue Act. In this particular act, Charles Townshend intended to tax goods that were imported from England, including lead, paint, paper, and tea. He believes that this particular tax will work because of some lobbying that Benjamin Franklin had done in prior years when he was in London speaking out against the Stamp Act. Benjamin Franklin differentiated between taxes. He called them internal or external taxes. Internal taxes were identified as taxes that are placed on colonial goods, which had far-reaching effects or direct effects on all colonists because they all had to pay it. And the problem there was that their local legislatures were already taxing goods in the colonies. External taxes, however, were indirect taxes placed on goods that were being imported into the colonies. Generally, only your merchants or your ship captains are going to pay these, and they're mostly about trade regulation. Townshend thinks that the distinction between the two types of taxes is ridiculous, but nonetheless, he believes that his tax is external, and therefore the colonists will not reject it. Unfortunately, Townshend is wrong on that. Many colonists saw the Townshend Acts, or the Revenue Act, as another way of the Crown raising revenue without colonial consent. In December 1767, John Dickinson writes a series of essays, about 12 essays, called Letters from a Farmer in Pennsylvania. He states that any tax designed to raise revenue is unconstitutional if it was not voted for by a people's elected representatives. These essays reignite the entire no taxation without representation argument. The Massachusetts Assembly, about a month or two later in early 1767, reacts to Dickinson's arguments. The Massachusetts Assembly condemns the Townshend Acts. They ask Sam Adams to draft a circular letter, which is known as the Massachusetts Circular Letter. In this letter, he calls on other colonial legislatures to reject these acts and requests a repeal from the British government. He also re-condemns taxation without representation. The irony here is that most colonial legislatures don't really care about the Circular Letter or the Revenue Act. It's not until Parliament reacts to this particular circular letter that other colonial legislatures get involved. Upon hearing of Massachusetts Circular Letter, Parliament is furious. They see the letter as outright rebellion. They tell the Massachusetts Assembly to pull the letter down, and governors are instructed to dissolve any assembly who endorses the letter or violates the instructions of Parliament. Of course, colonial legislatures are now going to get involved because of this hard line that Parliament's drawn. So numerous legislatures adopt the letter. And as instructed, the governors dismissed legislatures in Massachusetts, Maryland, Virginia, Delaware, and South Carolina, among others. The colonists then choose to readopt their non-importation or boycott agreements previously used. Over the next few months, exports to America drop by about 40%, so their boycotts do pretty well, although numerous merchants continue to trade British goods up until the late 1769. By 1770, after the Boston Massacre, the Townshend Acts are repealed. They repeal everything but the tea tax. In response, colonists continue to boycott tea, and that revenue will drop by a sixth. It's not until 1773 that the tea tax will ignite further tensions.